Before the original NHL expansion in 1967, he'd already played 10 seasons, winning the Stanley Cup 3 times. Drafted by the expansion St. Louis Blues, he would play another 4 seasons as the last NHL defenseman to play the game wearing glasses. Then he took over the Blues coaching, did that for a season, and in 1973, Bill Torrey convinced him to become the coach of the New York Islanders. His record is legendary. His first season here, the goals against was cut by 100. The team became better with each passing season, culminating in 4 consecutive Stanley Cup wins in the 1980s. After a retirement period, he'd come back to take the team on another run, and in 1993, knocked off the defending champions from Pittsburgh before losing the conference final. 1,500 games coached, 740 wins, was still the second highest number ever in the National Hockey League's history at the time of his passing. He was inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame as a builder in 1996, and his banner at the Nassau Coliseum went to the rafters in January of 1997. We gather here today on the anniversary of his passing to pay tribute to not just a great hockey coach, but to a role model as a husband, as a father, as a total gentleman, Alger Joseph Arbour. On behalf of the New York Islanders and the new ownership group, on behalf of Al's wife, Claire, the 4 Arbour children, Joanne, Julie, Janice, and Jay, and their families, I welcome you this morning. I thank you for being here. And now to preside over this memorial service, I turn to Monsignor Jim Vlon of the Maria Regina Parish of Seaford, Long Island. Monsignor.
Good morning, everyone. And it is a privilege and an honor to be with all of you and to spend time with all of you in the presence of the legacy of the Islanders. I remember when I was a boy, and some of you were boys, and bringing us Stanley Cups. One of the things my friends and I always said was that God was definitely an Islander fan. My prayer every day is that he still is. We gather today to give thanks to God. To give thanks to God for someone who has become part of the legacy of what it is to be a man of faith first, what it is to be a parent and husband, and what it is to be someone involved in professional sports, who brings his faith to work, who brings his faith to dedication, and shares his faith with his players. What a wonderful day. What a beautiful day for us to gather. We're going to hear a couple of scripture readings this morning. These scripture readings talk about legacy, what matters, what's important in life. To proclaim our first reading from Ecclesiastes, part of the legacy, one of the Islander greats, Mike Bossy.
Good morning. There is an appointed time for everything, and a time for every affair under the heavens. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot the plant. A time to tear down and a time to build. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to scatter stones and a time to gather them. A time to embrace and a time to be far from embraces. a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away, a time to rend and a time to sow, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time of war and a time of peace. Thank you.
The Lord's my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie in pasture green. He leads me by the still waters. His goodness restores my soul. He guides my ways in righteousness, and He anoints my head with oil, and my cup it overflows with joy. I feast on His delight. Your beauty and love refuse me, Lord, all the days of my life. I'll live in the house of my God all day for the rest of my life. And though I walk the darkest path, I will not fear the evil one, for you are with me, and your rod and staff, and the comforts I need to know. And I will trust in you alone. And I will trust in you alone. For you're the endless mercy follow me. Your goodness will lead me home. And I will trust in you alone, and I will trust in you alone, for your endless mercy follow me. Your goodness will lead me home.
I'd like to invite Bobby Nystrom to come forward now to proclaim our second reading, which many of you have probably heard from the first letter of Paul to the Corinthians. It's read all the time at people's weddings. It talks about legacy, and it talks about what matters in this world.
If I speak in tongues of men and angels, but have not love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, And if I have all faith so as to remove mountains but have not love, I have nothing. If I give away all I have, and if I deliver up my body to be burned but have not love, I gain nothing. Love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. As for prophecies, they will pass away. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part and we prophesy in part, but when the perfect comes, the partial will pass away. When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I gave up childish ways. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I have been fully known. So now faith, hope, and love abide, these three. But the greatest of these is love. Thank you.
As I said, these readings speak to us about legacy. They talk about what truly lasts in this world and what matters. And when we think of a day like today, we think of legacy. We think of the legacy that truly lasts. And you may say to yourself, well, Al Arbour's legacy is the Stanley Cup. It's these teams that he coached, played on. And that may be true, and that may be part. But if we think about legacy, and if you think about your legacy and my legacy, it's much more than our accomplishments, isn't it? It's much more than our name. I was telling some people before we began today, 19 seasons as the chaplain for the New York Jets. Don't boo me. I did my part. I'm doing my part. And I speak to the players sometimes about their legacy, particularly when I see players who will walk by some young kids who are looking for an autograph or a photo. And I'll say, 10 years from 15 years from now, when your playing days are over, your legacy will not involve your jersey, perhaps. For some it will, like the legends who proclaim the scripture to us today. And they always will be legends for what they have done. But for the rest of us, it may not be that way. And that's what St. Paul reminds us in this reading, that the legacy is not just the accomplishments, is it? But it's how we live our lives. Google Al Arbour later on. And when you get beyond hockey, you'll see a little bit more about him. And what St. Paul talks about at the end of that reading as truly lasting, that's the legacy that you and I need to really wish for in our lives. What lasts forever, that's what lasts. St. Paul says everything else goes away. The world tells us the legacy is about money and cars and stocks and bonds. But we know that passes. He knew that passed. He says in the end, there's three things that last. Faith lasts. Al Arbour, a man of deep faith, of real faith. As I said at the beginning, a man who took his faith to work every day. A man, as his wife Claire told me just before, carried the rosary in his pocket at every game. A man of faith. Think about that. Part of the legacy. Not just the Stanley Cup, you kids, but a man who lived the right way in this world and challenges us to do the same thing. That's a legacy to hang on to. A man of hope. One of the things I've noticed in the years I've been with the Jets is the good coach, the best coach, sees hope in his players. sees what could be in his players. And there's a relationship that seems to form that's very powerful. Almost like a dad with sons, an incredible respect. That's about hope. That's about seeing potential. That's about making a difference in this world. Think about being a person of hope. You want to live Al's legacy. You want to take something with you from this arena today. Take a little hope with you and recognize the power of hope that he offered to so many. He gave hope to Long Island at a time when Long Island needed hope. He gave hope to players who came in green and left legends. He lived hope with his family at home, in his parish, in his church, volunteering, helping those who came to him. Man of hope. And then there's love, and St. Paul says the greatest of these is love. Why is it so great? Because we love people without them physically around us. We're all loved by people who are not with us in this arena right now, and we love people who are not with us. And we're called in a very real way to still love Al as he continues to love all of you. Something so powerful about that gift of love, to recognize the many ways that love shows itself in this world. What makes it so great is that it's so obvious when it's there. If you've ever been at a wedding and you see that couple come together for the first second when that wedding ceremony begins, that's what love's about. That's what hope's about. That's what faith is about. That's the legacy, my friends. The legacy is not just the Stanley Cup. The legacy is not just these legends who sit before all of us today. The legacy is about us doing our best to live faith, to live hope, to live love in a world that needs it very, very desperately. It's up to us. We are the ones who live this faith now. Let us be proud to be part of the legacy. We are part of Al's legacy today. Let us be proud to do that. Let us be proud to share the legacy from his family. Let us be proud to leave this place changed by his life and encouraged by his legacy, that we may live his faith, hope, and love in this world. Jakes will come forward now to share a few words and to invite a number of these legends to share their experience of being part of the Al Arbour legacy.
There are, without a doubt, a million Al Arbour stories. We won't talk about the night in jail in Philadelphia, will we, Claire? Or the 30 stitches. But I'm sure the men who played for him over the years are going to regale you and probably bring a tear to your eye. And we'll get to that in just a moment. But 2 years ago, two men who had been college roommates at Harvard, Scott Malkin and John Ledecky, entered into a deal to become minority owners of the New York Islanders, with the provision that in that 2-year span they would become the majority owners. Well, that has happened. Here in July of 2016, it became reality, and we have a new ownership group. Born in New York City, but now with the heart of an Islander, John Ledecky has been upstaged recently, in the last 3 weeks in Rio, by his niece, Katie. So, ladies and gentlemen, here's Katie Ledecky's uncle, Uncle John. And an athlete, too.
Hi, everybody. Before I begin, I just want to give a quick salute to a man who will celebrate his 50th anniversary as a broadcaster this year when he dons the mic for us on one of our games. How about a quick salute to our Master of Ceremonies, Jiggs McDonald, 50 years in the business.
Thank you, John.
I want to thank everybody who's come here today in the midst of your busy schedules. First of all, and always, I want to thank the Islander fans. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for saluting the coach. That means so much to Claire and the Arbour family, so give yourself a round of applause. We're so happy to have some great Islander alumni, legends, and hockey royalty from near and far who have traveled to salute Al. Last night we had a little get-together, and we added up in the room that the gentlemen who had this small dinner had between them 35 Stanley Cup rings. And that's quite an accomplishment, if you ask me, for a group of guys. I also want to thank the players, the current Islanders, who have come from their summer vacations to be here today for Al Arbour's salute, including our captain, number 91, John Tavares. Thank you for being here. The coaches and staff, Jack Capuano, Garth Snow, Art McCarthy, we salute you as well, and we wish Jack the best of luck with the World Cup as one of the assistant coaches next month up in Toronto. There's a lot of love in this room today, and I read something that Al Arbour once said after he won his 3rd Stanley Cup in a row. He said, "I love these guys. I want to hug them and kiss them and bring them home to Claire." And I think that says a lot about the mood in the room today. But he could also be a taskmaster. Last night I heard a story from Jean Potvin, who said that he wasn't playing well, and Al came up to him on the ice and said, "I want to see you in the office after practice." He went into the office and Al said, "Let's get this straight. You have a good life. You play hockey. How many games do we play a week? 4. How many minutes do you log on the ice? Maybe 20? So can't you give me 80 minutes of work a week that means something to the team?" Of course, we all laugh about that today, but Al was a taskmaster. He was someone who could tear you down, says Jean, and then build you up. And I heard that from several alumni yesterday, that they would go through a brick wall for Al Arbour, and they still would today. You look behind me and you see 1,500 games. That's heritage. And every night when our current Islanders go out and skate at home, and when they're here at this wonderful new practice facility, they see that banner, and that means our heritage. But our legacy, the legacy of Al Arbour, is not only the 4 Stanley Cups in a row, which are an incredible accomplishment, but think about this: 19 consecutive playoff series wins. 19. Think about that record. It will never, ever in the history of sports, from my perspective, be broken. And to that I say, wow, what an unbelievable accomplishment that Al and the guys had on the ice those years. So that's our legacy, that's our heritage, and then it comes to our tradition. I had a chance to talk with Claire before we came out today, and she showed me this beautiful necklace that she has. And on that necklace is a memento of every Stanley Cup that Al Arbour was either a player or a coach. And Claire, the best salute that we can give your husband and the Arbour family is when we win that 5th ring, and we will come, and we will give you that pendant on your necklace representing the legacy of Al Arbour. Thank you very much, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you, John. Thank you, John. I think any of us who ever spent any time with Al, and especially the gentlemen down here, have been asked time and time again, what made Al so successful? What made him a great coach? Time after time I've said that Al Arbour was a sports psychologist because before we'd even heard that term, sports psychologist. Al knew what buttons to push. But in thinking about preparation for today and this gathering, the thought came to me, the light came on. Al Arbour coached the person and then coached the athlete. Would you guys agree? I think so. Now we get to share some of those memories of time spent with Al. Those who performed on the ice got all the accolades, it seemed, but those who first discovered the talents of the players who brought the Stanley Cups to Long Island played such a huge role in Al's life as well. And one of those people here today, we welcome Mario Saraceno.
Hello. Al Arbour's name has been a very important part of the Saraceno's life since 1973. It is therefore a great privilege for me to be on this stage today to honor him. I never thought that almost 38 years ago, in 1979, when Bill Torrey and Jim DeVolano reached out to me in order to replace my dad, who had suddenly passed away as a scout in Quebec, that I would be here today paying tribute to such a great man. I already knew Al Arbour from the time he had come to my family's modest home, to my dad's funeral, and by his reputation. However, it took me many years before I could call him Al, and many more years before I could feel comfortable doing so. He just had that presence about him that was so impressive for a 20-year-old. Almost intimidating, but at the same time very comforting. He immediately became a role model. He was one of those few men that by their mere presence and a few words could influence a person, a discussion, and a crowd. He taught me how to be proud and confident, but even more so, humble and respectful. Those are also Islander traits and the way his teams won Stanley Cups. I was always amazed at how much people respected him, liked him, and admired him. They say that you are how you act, not just how you believe you are. For that matter, I would guess there weren't many I could haves or I should haves in Al's last few years. He had and lived a very fulfilled and purposeful life. Legacies are built one memory at a time. Well, I'll tell you what, Al left us many fond memories and a very true legacy. He's the person you wanted as your best friend. He's the trusted colleague you wanted by your side. He's the coach you wanted as a rookie player in the NHL. But most of all, I would imagine, he's the husband, the father, and the family member you would be proud and blessed of having. He had a special sense of humor, as he would often tease the scouts about the success or non-success of certain players. If a drafted player did not pan out, it was the scout's fault, obviously. Bad judgment, bad pick. He would also get under our skin around draft day, saying things like, "Mario, when's the last time we drafted a good player from your league?" You weren't upset upon hearing these comments because I can guarantee you worked even harder the next year. In conclusion, and of utmost importance, although I didn't know Al as intimately as many others on this stage, scouts nonetheless have flair. And I know I speak for myself and many behind-the-scene Islanders personnel, like scouts, administrative staff, and many others, in saying that we greatly appreciated that Al treated us with lots of respect, importance, and humor. He made us feel that we were part of his life. We were proud to work for the same team that he coached and for an organization that he cherished. For that, we thank him. May you rest in peace, Mr. Arbour.
Well done, Mary. This next gentleman left the St. Louis Blues organization where he had worked with Al Arbour to become the Eastern Scout for the New York Islanders. He'd become the head scout, the man responsible for the minor league operation, and later the assistant general manager as the team won their first 3 of 4 Stanley Cups. Then the Detroit Red Wings came calling, and Jimmy D would oversee the building of the rebuilding, of the heralded franchise. Today, he's their senior vice president, an alternate governor, and a member of the Hockey Hall of Fame, Jimmy DeBaldano.
What a privilege it is to be here today to honor a great man, a great coach, and a personal, very close friend of mine, Alger Arbour. The year was 1954. I was 11 years old. My parents had season tickets at Maple Leaf Gardens in Toronto. The NHL was very different in those days. There were only 6 teams. One night I went to Maple Leaf Gardens to see the Detroit Red Wings, and I noticed something strange. In those days, players didn't wear helmets, and I saw this big lanky guy playing for Detroit on defense, but he wore glasses. I'd never seen a player wear glasses before. Al was a young player on a great Detroit team back in 1953-54, and he would go on to get a Stanley Cup ring and win his first Stanley Cup. As I continued to follow the NHL out of Toronto, a few years later, Al would be traded to the Chicago Blackhawks. The thing with Chicago was they hadn't won the Stanley Cup since 1938. And in 1960-61, with Al Arbour on defense in Chicago, they would win the Stanley Cup, and Al would have his second Stanley Cup ring. As a boy growing up in Toronto, obviously, in the late 50s and through the 60s before expansion, I was a fan of the Toronto Maple Leafs. And guess who would arrive as a player during the mid-60s? Al Arbour. And he would be with the Toronto Maple Leafs for another 2 Stanley Cups. So that gave him 4 Stanley Cups as a player in the NHL. Expansion came in 1967. I was lucky to go to the St. Louis Blues as a young scout, and there I got to meet another fabulous coach, another great coach in Scotty Bowman. Became friendly with Scotty, and he and Lynn Patrick named Al Arbour the first captain of the expansion St. Louis Blues. Al retired after about 4 years with the Blues. I was still scouting with them, and that's really where I got to meet Al Arbour, work with him, and we really established a friendship. Bill Torrey, my mentor and a tremendous boss for me, the architect of the Islanders, brought me to the island when he started the franchise in 1972. We had a terrible year that first year, but in hindsight, both Bill and I are glad we did, because it got us Dennis Potvin, and things would never quite be as bad again. Things got good in a hurry. A year later, Bill Torrey reached out to Al Arbour and brought him to the New York Islanders, which made me one happy, happy guy. And of course, I think everybody knows what happened once Al got to the Islanders. We got good real quick, and as we approached the 80s, we became a dynasty. Al had so much to do with that. Another personal memory I have of Al was in my last year with the Islanders. He said to me, "Jimmy D," he said, "why don't we go to Florida and share a condo?" He said, "I found a good place on Longboat Key," and he said, "why don't we split a condo?" I'd never been there. I didn't know where Longboat Key was. But anyways, we purchased it together. Claire Arbour furnished it beautifully, and we became condo partners. So I have nothing but tremendous memories of Claire, Al, their family. Again, just in conclusion, he really was a great man, a great coach, and a personal friend, and I miss him.
Thanks, Jimmy. A gentleman who knew Al well throughout his career, Jim Gregory was a coach, a general manager. He's chaired the selection committee of the Hockey Hall of Fame for many, many years. More recently, he's been the senior vice president of hockey operations for the National Hockey League, also a member of the Hockey Hall of Fame in the Builders category, Mr. Jim Gregory. Hey, Tonto. Jimmy, not bad.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, everyone, Claire, family. What an honor and what a pleasure to be here today at this wonderful event, honoring His Highness Al Arbour. It is even a greater honor to be included in this presentation to one of the most unbelievable gentlemen ever associated with the sport of hockey and the NHL. I had the pleasure of meeting Al and getting to know him back in the 50s and the 60s when both of us were associated with the Toronto Maple Leafs in one way or another. Al was playing and I was helping with the junior hockey team. During that time, I had the pleasure of being able to see Al and speak to him a few times and really learn a lot about our sport. How lucky was I? When you go over all of the career, you quickly learn how successful Al was and what an unbelievable special man you were privileged to be with. A person who was unique, caring, respectable, and I could go on and keep adding beautiful things. In fact, he was regal. But the most important characteristic he possessed, in my opinion, was that he cared about people and would try to help you in any way he could. His leadership and ability has long been known to all of us, and just knowing him makes it great to be part of this celebration. My sincere congratulations to Al for this remembrance, to his family, especially Claire, and to the New York Islanders for this great tribute and special day. And a special thanks to Mr. Bill Torrey. Thank you.
Thanks, Jimmy. I'll apologize to this gentleman right up front. I had 2.5 pages of an introduction. I said, that's too much. He's the man who gave Al Arbour the opportunity to coach in the National Hockey League, and this individual went on to become the winningest coach in the history of the game. Close friends throughout their lives. I give you also a member of the Hockey Hall of Fame, none other than William Scott, just call me Scotty, Bowman.
As you can see, I'm not much of a skater, but I want to be careful. I'd like to thank John Ledecky, Garth Snow, Joanne Holloway for all the great arrangements that were made and for this very honorable, and I'm very proud to come and speak to you people today. No person in the history, in the birth of the St. Louis Blues, was more influential and important than Al Arbour. I had a sheet of paper. I was showing it to some people last night. I was talking to Claire before. I played junior hockey in Montreal before I got injured and got into coaching at a young age. And little did I know that I did play a game in 1951. I was playing for the Montreal Juniors, and Al was with the Windsor Spitfires, and I got the program, and here I looked at it, and number 5, Al Arbour, and number 19 on the Montreal team, Scotty Bowman. I didn't remember much about the game, but I talked to Claire about it, and I talked to Al many times and about his start in hockey, and he was a winner from day one. He won the Northern Ontario Championship, and as a teenager, a midget championship. And most of the players in the NHL in those days, they came from Northern Ontario or Northern Quebec or Western Canada, because we didn't have a lot of indoor rinks. And the ice, of course, was longer in those places. And Al got a chance to go to Toronto with 2 of his line mates to go to the fabulous school, St. Mike's. And if you signed with the junior team in those years, there was no entry draft. You became the property of the NHL team. In Toronto, it was St. Mike's. And somehow, I think Al mentioned to me, Toronto and Detroit both were after him to go and play junior hockey. And his parents were not that sure of Toronto. There was a priest that sent 2 of his line mates to Toronto. And Al went to Windsor, a smaller city, went to Assumption, and all of a sudden played for the Windsor Spitfires. And this was the start of a career that no one will equal for me, because after the 1 year and 2 years in junior, the farm team was in Edmonton, and Al and Glenn Hall, who was just starting his pro career, they went to Edmonton, the farm team. What do you know? They won the Canadian Professional Championship. There was the Western League. They beat the Quebec League. So that's his first championship. And Jimmy had mentioned he goes on to Detroit the next year. Detroit Red Wings won first place 7 straight seasons, from 1948 to 1955. They had a powerhouse. Players, when you got a team, you didn't lose players like you do today. You kept them, and they had so many. And Al won that cup in 1954, and then he went on to Chicago when they were rebuilding, and the league was concerned about Chicago at the time, and Toronto and Montreal sold them players, and Al went from Detroit to Chicago. They were in the same ownership. He got to Chicago, they won the cup, and then I think what really changed his career, when he won 2 cups in Toronto, he was playing in Rochester, and every March they would bring Al Arbour up to Toronto. And his family here were pretty young at the time, and he told me a story. He said, I would have won a 3rd cup. He said, I was a pretty lucky guy. I'd go up in March and play a few games, but he said, I was one of the few players I put in my contract, because it was getting to be an ordeal to leave Rochester. I put in my contract, a 1-year deal, that Toronto could not recall me to Toronto from Rochester without my permission. And that was quite a contract. But he didn't go the 3rd year. He would have been on another cup winner. But Al was the playing coach of the Rochester Americans. He won 2 more trophies, the Calder Cup, 2 more in Rochester. And the last one, he was the assistant playing coach. And I had scouted for St. Louis the first year before expansion. And we drafted Al. And Al didn't come to our training camp. And I was talking to one of his daughters today, Joanne, and she was saying that they thought he was retired. He wasn't going to come. But Al didn't tell people very much in those days. Al was a holdout. And he held out for 2 weeks. And finally, we got him signed to a 3-year contract. That was really, I mean, nobody could believe that we would sign a 35-year player to a 3-year contract. And I'm telling you, my first year in St. Louis, I was supposed to be the coach the 2nd year. I was assistant coach and assistant manager. I'd just come from a junior team in Montreal. I was really wet behind the ears. I didn't know what I was getting into. And I started to coach on the bench the defense. Al was our captain, and we were really struggling. We had some veterans on the team. We had a few young players in our farm team, and I used to go down and see them play. And then lo and behold, after about a month and a half, we were 4 wins, 10 losses, 2 ties, and the manager called me and said, I want you to take over the team. I want you to coach. You were going to coach next year. Wow. I started to really get nervous, and I didn't know what to do. And he said, well, see me at practice tomorrow. Very first person I went to was, I had only been with him for a couple of months, was Al. I said, Al, I got to ask you something as a player, and I'm an assistant coach. I really don't feel like I should coach the team this year. I don't think I'm ready. And he said to me, well, what do you mean you're not ready? I said, well, you know, he said, I know what you're thinking, but you know all those Kansas City players. He said, we need some help. But he said, if you don't take the job, somebody's going to take it. So he said, I think you got no choice. He said, you know, we'll work together. And he said, you know, we're a young team. And Claire was such an important part of the team because she was one of the veterans that had been around. She'd been in Detroit, Chicago, all these other places. So Claire got a hold of all the young wives. She had luncheons for them. They went to movies together, and she built that off ice, and Al was on ice. And you know, we turned it around. We made a trade with the Rangers. We had a veteran player. Well, we brought up an entire line from our farm team. Frank St. Marseille, Terry Crisp, and Gary Sabrin all came up because Al said, you know, Scotty, he was like sort of coaching our team at the time. And I said, you know, he said, this team's not good enough. He said, you better make changes. And that's why we brought up those players. And we made a big trade with the Rangers, and we got Red Berenson, who wasn't playing much with the Rangers. And they offered us a young defenseman that played junior for me, Barclay Plager. So I went to Al again, and I said, Al, I don't know if I should stick my neck out, but we can get another defenseman that's playing in the American League. What do you think of Barclay Plager? He played in Buffalo. He said, Scotty, Barclay Plager is an NHL player playing in the American Hockey League. Take him in a minute. And he and Barclay Plager played together for the next 3 seasons. They were awesome. They were the best defense pair. People don't realize how great a player Al was. Blocking shots. Glenn Hall always told me, and he played with some great players. Best defenseman ever played in front of me, Al Arbour. He could block shots like anybody with his glasses. And anyways, Al went on to 3 more. When you look at his record, Al played 17 professional seasons and won 10 championships. 10 championships in 17 seasons. And unfortunately, after the 3rd season, in fact, another anecdote I could tell you about, we made a trade in the 4th year. I put Al Arbour in as coach because it was just too much work. And Al started to coach, and we were doing okay. Chicago had been put into our division, and they were a powerhouse. We were still the best of the expansion teams. And with about 25 games to go, we made a trade. And unfortunately, the trade we made, I wasn't for it, but they wanted to think of the future. And included in the trade, we had to take a player that really wasn't what we wanted. And he was a troublemaker at the time. Al had played with him. He was a star on a team when Al was only a regular player. I was in the lineup to pay my incidentals in Montreal. I'll tell you what kind of a player Al Arbour was and a captain. And this man went to one of our young players and said, "What are you doing in the lineup?" He said, "Well, I'm paying my incidentals." No, he said, don't pay the incidentals. He said, the accounting might forget about it. You may not even get billed. Al was right behind this player. And Al called him over and he said, "We have a team here, and I'm the captain of this team." And I was standing behind him, and I'm coaching. I'm coach and manager. And he said, "Don't you ever do anything like that again, or you won't be on this team." So, you know, people don't know about Al Arbour. He was firm, he was fair, and he was fearless. And that's a true story. And unfortunately, things didn't work out. We lost in the playoffs. Things went south with the team, and Al had to go and take a scouting job. I left for Montreal. It wasn't going to work out. The people that owned the team said, "Al Arbour will never be an NHL coach." And I said, "That's enough for me." And I got out of there. I had a contract for 37 months, and I knew I could get a job somewhere, but I gave up my contract because there was other people involved too. And Al went on, and he became, you know, the toughest thing for me as a coach in the NHL, honestly, was trying to coach against Al Arbour. I went to Buffalo. We had a great team. We played the Islanders. I think we fell behind and we got beat. That was the first time I ever coached a game. Well, I actually coached in Montreal, but we had that four cups in a row. And the Islanders, we could see them in '78. They were just really close. I think we won the series in 6 games, really close. We had a powerhouse. 11 players went into the Hall of Fame. And then again, I ran into Al in '92. I'm coaching in Pittsburgh. We won 18 games in a row at the end of the season. And what do you know? The Islanders beat us in the 7th game. And, you know, I had a lot of good years in the league. And even though I lost in those years, I never really felt, because it was Al Arbour, and I knew what he meant to my career, the way that I started as a young coach, the way I developed, and just most of the things that I did, he is the one reason that I did them, because he stood up for fairness and he stood up for the right thing to do. And then, of course, it's odd enough, when you count, Al won 4 cups with the Stanley Cups as a coach. He won 10 other championships, is 14. It's the same number I have. We both ended up in Sarasota, Florida. His family is now here today, and you know, I really want to say hi to Claire and Joanne and Jay and Janice and Julie, because we kind of grew up together. They were only that small, and we haven't seen enough of each other. But I'm really pleased that I was invited here to share some stories about Al Arbour, because John Ledecky mentioned 19 19 series in a row, and half a dozen of these guys are here today. And I was trying to figure it out, and I asked Jimmy D last night, I said, they must have had to win four series in those days too. Yes, they won the 16, and they won 3 more before they got beat. And I said, well, you know, Wayne Gretzky's got most of the records in hockey. He's not going to get that record because it would take a team would have to win 5 Stanley Cups in a row to win 20 series. So as a legacy, Al, you've left something that nobody will ever touch, and your family is right here. And I just want to say, the same as Jimmy, I miss Al quite a bit. Thank you very much.
Don't go away. Don't go away. Scotty. Stay with me for a second here, Scotty. It would have been 5 Stanley Cups, except in 1984, the National Hockey League saw fit to play that 2-3-2 thing. You didn't have anything to do with that? Jimmy did that? I knew we'd get to the bottom of it somehow. The other thing I wanted to ask you, come on over here to this microphone. Your days in St. Louis, snipe hunts. Snipe hunts were a big thing, were they not?
Al started it.
Was there a better snipe hunter? For those who don't know, rookie initiation involves hunting for snipe. Scotty, you can explain. Claire, are you laughing? Yes, you are.
Well, I mean, it was a family affair in St. Louis, and Al being the captain and Glenn Hall, they had played together in Edmonton, and they used to take the young guys out, and they were all, with all their hunting equipment and everything else, they went to a farm, and they were trying to look for snipe, and these guys, they bought it hook, line, and sinker. And Al did that every year. Every time we'd get a couple of rookies, that was their initiation. But yeah, he built the team in St. Louis, and he built the team here. So, you know, we tagged along, and Al just one of a kind.
Thanks, Scotty.
Thank you.
Butchie, you might as well get up, Butch. I know it'll take you a while as well. He's been called the catalyst, the guy who put the New York Islanders hockey team over the top when he arrived in that March of 1980 trade. He would go on to coach at every level of the game, no doubt using many of the Al Arbour methods. Number 91, Butch Goring. I didn't say Robert.
Good day, everyone. It's a real honor to be here, and I couldn't help but think, as listening to Bobby Nystrom read scriptures, how Al Arbour must be just laughing his ass off to think about Bobby doing that kind of thing. I didn't get to meet Al Arbour really personally till the trade way back in 1980, but certainly joined the Islanders knowing full well what that team was all about, the workmanlike way they went about their business, the sincerity, the calm, the confidence of the New York Islanders, and it was a direct reflection of their coach, Al Arbour. Along the way, after winning the first Stanley Cup, I became a little closer to Al, became an assistant playing coach, and so was privy to certain situations and certainly good advice along the way. And one of the things he told me, because he knew I wanted to coach and be successful, was that you had to know your team. You had to know it as confident and as often and as much as you could know, and you had to know each and every player. He said that was key, Butch. He said if you were going to be successful, you got to know what makes these guys tick. You got to know everything about them, what they like, what gum they chew. Just know everything about them. And a little later on in 1981, February 21st, I can remember this date very clearly, the Islanders were struggling. They were 2-6-2 in their last 10 games, and Al decided that he needed to do something, so he benched me. Well, that didn't make me all that happy because I'd never been benched in my life, but Al decided that's what he was going to do, and then the season finished on a pretty high note. We went 14-2-4. So Al Arbour, yeah, he knew what he was doing. He knew that there were certain things that had to happen, and this is what he was talking about, knowing your hockey team. Well, as we all know, we won the Stanley Cup in 1981, and we had our banquet, and I was still fuming from February 21st and decided that I would go and pay Al a visit after a couple of beverages. Al was sitting there, and he was all by himself. And I said, Al, can I talk to you? And he said, I've been waiting for you, Butch. And I said, I'm going to go back to February 21st. And, you benched me. I was angry. I was hurt. And there were a lot of other guys that weren't playing all that well, too. So, why me? And he was very clear and very concise. And he said, I knew our team was struggling, and I knew we had to wake up somehow, some way. And so I had to do something that was maybe unexpected, a little bit drastic, catch everybody off guard, but at the same time, I wanted to wake everybody up. And he did. He woke everybody up. Everybody got the message. They kicked it into gear, and we were unbeatable in the playoffs. And he said, and just, oh, by the way, he said, you weren't playing that well either. You were one of those guys. And I said, yeah, you're right. I could have been a little better. He said, I had a real strong feeling, Butch, he said, about you, that if I could get under your skin a little bit, I could anger you a little bit, that you just might come out and play the best hockey of your life. And he was right again. I went on to win the Conn Smythe Trophy. So Al Arbour was such a smart guy. He had such great intuition, and he did know his team. He knew his players, and there were many instances where he was able to get guys going in different ways. And for me, he's made an incredible lasting impression on me. And I've had success as a coach, and I owe a lot of it to Al Arbour, just thinking back to the way he used to handle things and suggestions that he would make. And I'll leave you with one parting comment. I was coaching down in Salt Lake, and we were in a playoff series, and we lost the first game. And Al came down the dressing room, and I was all concerned, and he saw the look on my face, and he said, what's your problem, Butch? And I said, well, we lost the first game. He said, worry when you've lost 4. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Butchie. From an Olympic hockey gold medal in Lake Placid to a Stanley Cup on Long Island in the matter of a couple of months. A legacy one can only dream of as a hockey player. He played until the 1989 season as the Wolfman, or Wolfie. Today, he's the Islanders' Director of Pro Scouting and a member of the U.S. Hockey Hall of Fame. Number 6, Kenny Morrill.
First, I want to thank you all for being here today to celebrate a man who is hockey royalty. More importantly, a man who was a loving husband and father to his wonderful family, and a cherished friend and neighbor to many of you. In looking back, the lessons that Al taught us on the ice were life lessons as well. He talked a lot about commanding respect, about earning everything, about facing adversity and never wavering, and about responsibility to your teammates, to the Islander jersey, and to the people of Long Island. My favorite memories of Al, well, the nickname that he gave me when I first arrived here, Moses. I think it had something to do with the beard. And I can still hear him calling me that. Or when he would hold court after our pregame meals on the road. I would make sure I would stay after, and Al would sit at the table and talk for an hour. The great old stories about his playing days. I couldn't get enough of that. There was the time when, in Quebec, when he dislocated his shoulder trying to hold Bobby Nystrom back from jumping over the boards to join into a fight. And then I'll never forget the time at Caniac Park at our practice rink when Al comes walking in. He had a pair of sunglasses on to hide 2 black eyes. He had his arm in a sling. He came walking through the door, went right into his office. We were all wondering what the heck happened. And sure enough, he had had an encounter the night before at Republic Airport with his runaway car and a bunch of airplanes. Anyway, Al, you are greatly missed. May you rest in peace. Thank you.
Thanks, Billy. Long Island became hockey's fantasy island on that Saturday afternoon in May back in 1980, when number 23 scored an overtime goal to seal the deal and the first Stanley Cup came to Long Island. He is Mr. Islander, number 23, Bob Nystrom. Thanks, Harry.
Thanks so much there, Jigs. I really appreciate it. And I just have to say also, thank you all for being here on this special day to celebrate the life of a man who did so much for his family, his players, his friends, and for Long Island. I've always said that there are some people in this world that can have the most profound impact on your life. That is a teacher and a coach. The gentleman I'm going to speak about today was both a teacher and a coach. And aside from my parents, he had the biggest impact on my life. He was at the top of the class for both these professions. Al was an incredible coach, teacher, husband, father, grandfather, and friend. And yes, he was definitely the best motivator I have ever met. He had an uncanny ability to motivate people, but as people have said here already this morning, he took the time to learn about each one of his players. What were their likes, their dislikes, what they thought of themselves, and whether or not they had character. That was the key word for Al Arbour. He knew the right buttons to press, and he would scream at some guys and pamper others. And as you heard from a couple of the players that were up here, he had quiet, well, I shouldn't say quiet conversations in his room, but he dealt with the players individually, and he was able to get the most out of them. Yes, he did teach us to be better hockey players, but more importantly, he taught us about life, about having character, and about also becoming men. But what was so amazing about Al is the fact that he never ever took credit for anything or any success that the team had. He would always pass the accolades on to other folks. He would praise the players, the assistant coach, or the trainers, or the fans. And worst case scenario, he'd praise his stick boys. I'm not sure how he ever became such a success, because according to him, he never did anything. But yes, as you heard this morning and this afternoon, the fact is that he accomplished so much. Winning Stanley Cups after Stanley Cups, winning in junior, winning in 1973, he came to the New York Islanders after they had won 12 games, and in 7 short years, he takes them to 4 straight Stanley Cups. Do you really think this was a coincidence? Not on your life. This man was truly special. Michelle and I had a chance to visit Al and Claire just before Al passed away. I wanted to see him so I could thank him personally for all the things he had done for me. Not only did he give me an opportunity to play for the New York Islanders and win 4 Stanley Cups, but he taught me things that have been the fabric of my life after hockey. So much of what I have accomplished has been because of Al. He's been an inspiration. One of the most valuable lessons that he taught us, and I think that you saw it on the screen before, is that you should never fear losing. He would say, what's the worst that can happen if you lose? You'll still wake up tomorrow and the sun will come out, but wouldn't it be better to be on your toes attacking and wanting to be the hero that scores the goal in victory rather than being on your heels because you're afraid to make a mistake and lose? During every intermission, when we went into overtime, someone in that room would yell, who's going to be the hero? And every guy in that room said, I am, I am. There wasn't one guy that went out there on that ice and didn't think that he was going to score the goal and be the hero. So you probably get the idea that I felt pretty strongly about Al Arbour, and you're absolutely right. We didn't win because we were faster than other teams. We didn't win because we were stronger than other teams. We didn't win because we were more talented than other teams. We won because Al Arbour taught us how to win and succeed. So, what is success? I would think that one measure is of all the people that you have come in contact with, how many of you helped and positively affected? On this alone, Al Arbour is head and shoulders above the rest of us. Just ask the hundreds of players he played with and who played for him. We will miss you, Al, but we will never forget you or what you taught us. Thanks.
Well, this is another one of those introductions that could take at least an hour. But I'll just say that he predicted he'd score 50 goals in his rookie season. He did. He got 53 and was named Rookie of the Year in the National Hockey League. Then he became only the second player in the history of the game to score 50 in 50 goals in 50 games. His entire career was spent on the right side of the New York Islanders' top line. He, too, is an honored member of the Hockey Hall of Fame. Number 22, Mike Bossy.
Thank you. And thank you for attending the ceremony today. I know no one who deserves it more than Al Arbour. In 1977, summer of 1977, Al Arbour told Jimmy D, go get the goal scorer. And I was drafted 15th by the New York Islanders. Not too long after that, and a story was just told previously about it, I arrived for my press conference and contract signing in New York, and who was there but Al Arbour, but more importantly, and my wife and I talk about this very often, more importantly, Claire was there. And Claire lent a helping hand to Al to welcome me, but more so, lent a helping hand to welcome my wife Lucy to Long Island. And Claire, my wife, still talks about that day and how much she appreciated the fact that you were there and that you welcomed us to the Islander family. Not too long after that, during my first training camp, I wasn't drafted earlier because I wasn't a very good player defensively, and I remember going up to Al during numerous practices and asking Al if I should be in one particular spot or another, if I should be doing this or I should be doing that. And the third day he sort of looked at me and said, listen, kid, if I have something to tell you about your defensive play, I'll come up and tell you. We drafted you to score goals, and I want you to score goals. At that point, it was life-changing advice for me at the time, knowing that I had a great defenseman and a great coach supporting the way that I knew how to play hockey the best. And I can truly say that there were so many times I cursed Al because I didn't play enough. But I loved the man. I respected him dearly for everything that he helped me achieve. And as everyone has said previous to me, we miss him a lot. Thank you.
As the building blocks were being put into place for this franchise, good fortune turned to pure gold with the first overall draft selection in 1973. But to Al, he was just another player, the one that he always seemed to pick on, right, Danny? Yep. You're going to tell us about the piano on your back? Anyway, you'll always be known as the captain, an honored member of the Hockey Hall of Fame, number 5, Danny Potvin. I had to.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. And one of the things that all of the great players I played with reminded me while they were talking is that I want to thank Long Island. What a time we had in the 70s and the 80s. Wow. You know, there wasn't one holiday night when those of us who were still bachelors at that time and young players didn't have an invitation to go to Thanksgiving dinner somewhere or to go to Christmas dinner somewhere. So that's really what I remember in those days, and that was the foundation of what became a team that won and won a lot. Well, I think that the other thing is certainly thank you, Mr. Ledecky, for having this and being part of this. We want the Islander organization to be great again. I know you've got Garth Snow to deal with, but I certainly hope that you're going to have a little luck in getting him straightened out and having that great team perform well. Claire and the wonderful family, I guess you know by now, a lot of people loved your husband and your father. And I was one of them. And what I really have to say is that now it's the time for me to talk about my Al Arbour. You know, we talked about 19 consecutive playoff series. I mean, one of the greatest or the greatest coach, whatever what you want, but Scotty Bowman certainly mentored Al for a long time. But this was an organization that won 19 consecutive playoff series. It had never been done and will never be done again. We had a builder in Bill Torrey who brought the players, the right players at the right time, and we had a coach who knew how to manage all of them. I've often been asked, how did you guys do that? Whether it's stamina, talent, whether it was determination, how did you do it all? And I said, well, we had some great leaders. We had Bill Torrey, we had Al Arbour. And I think Al did it in communication. Oftentimes you wonder, how does the word get across? Well, I'll tell you how it got across. He communicated really well with us, sometimes a little differently. My brother and I had a pretty good year in 1976. We combined for 172 points. Hockey News had us labeled as a dynamic duo. Al had us labeled as cigar store Indians. Yeah, and Jiggs kind of got into my story. There was one night in Pittsburgh, how could I ever forget? First period, probably not my best period. Al came in the dressing room, he looked at me and he says, Dennis, you look like you're skating with a piano on your back. Second period was maybe a little better, but not to Al's liking. So when he came back in the dressing room, he said, Dennis, it's one thing to skate with a piano on your back, but it's another to stop and play it. Oh, it wasn't just me. He really had the number on each one of us. You've heard from some of my teammates. There was an egg incident. We were all in the dressing room, and Al had prepared for this. He probably didn't like the way we played, certainly not as physically as we should have played, or at least the way he thought we should play. So he had the trainers, Jim Pickett, God rest his soul, we lost Jim just recently, Ron Waskey, carrying cartons of eggs. And Al went to each one of us with a raw egg, and he said, "Here, put this in your pants. The way you guys are playing, you're never going to break them." And probably the best is that, you know, every coach needs to have a time where he really figures he's got it all together. But now is a time where he's got to get his team to focus. Well, some of you were around in the 70s and early 80s, and transcendental meditation was another way of getting people to focus. Some of you may have known that. Well, Al had a way of keeping things fresh, and I always remember, Bobby, you remember this. We were all given a time to go into a hotel room, and when you open up the door, there was a smell of incense. We're at training camp. What's going on? Well, in front of me was not Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, but it was some guru with a long white robe. And I sat there, and over 20 minutes, I left with one word that I was supposed to say to myself. Well, that soon became my afternoon nap. And Al had a way of getting our attention. Al had a great way of communicating, and that's the way he did it. Yeah, sometimes it was tough to take. My brother said to me yesterday, he said, if you ever write a book, you should title it Al Arbour, Me, and That Whistle. That's a story for another day, maybe a story for the book. But Al, as you know, was not only a great coach, he was not only a great leader, but what he left us with was what I believe he was a life mentor. We learned a lot on the ice, but maybe we learned more about ourselves and people. Thanks, Al. It was a great ride.
Always known as the architect of the great New York Islanders franchise, turns out he wasn't just the architect, but a heck of a salesman as well, selling both Al and Claire on the attributes of Long Island and the great lifestyle that this island provides, convincing them to move here in 1973, the bow tie, the banner at the Coliseum, now in Brooklyn, of course. None other than the Hockey Hall of Famer, the architect, Mr. William A. Bill Torrey. Mr. T. Whoop. One last step.
First of all, John, I hope next April the result is slightly different. But I do wish you nothing but the very best. Claire, girls, Arbour family, coming here today, I retraced my steps that I did with your husband and your father 1,000 times. I went past number 10 Donovan Drive, down into Cold Spring Harbor, stopped at the Frankie Torelli's Cold Spring Harbor Deli,
All the times we went in there, Al, 3 things he bought: a coffee, Hall's throat lozenges, and 2 packs of cigarettes. Well, I had the coffee today, and I have the lozenges. I didn't go for the cigarettes. But those were different times. And in all the years and all the trips that I made with him, how I didn't get secondhand smoke, it's a miracle for me anyway. Yes, he was a special human being. The time I spent with him and all the accolades that he's received here today, I can tell you, I had a few hours with him that were, I couldn't say worthy of any accolade. But every time, every day, every trip, every win, every loss, we had a unique relationship. Whenever we had a difference of opinion, nobody else knew about it. The door was closed, and we found a way to work it out. He learned, I learned. And there will never be anyone just like this man. This is the 3rd memorial on his passing of a year ago. And believe me, no one deserved 3 memorials more than this man. That, I think, was his only hat trick in hockey. We'd get in the car, he'd have his coffee and the ciggy, and he'd have his yellow pad preparing what he was going to do that day, or if we were heading to the airport, who we were playing. No stone unturned in his preparation. I learned early, when he wasn't talking, I wasn't talking. I don't interrupt a genius. And there were times when he was truly a genius. Stubborn, yeah. Tough, yeah. And I remember my first meeting with him in the Queen Elizabeth Hotel in Montreal in June. And I was looking for a coach. There's no secrets of that. And I knew Al, but not intimately. But I had done a lot of homework. And he was the guy I wanted. Didn't come easy. Had some anxious moments. Jimmy D was after me every day. Have you talked to Al today? But I had one other person I'm going to name who did this franchise a big favor, and he's never gotten the accolade that he should. It was his teammate in Rochester and Toronto, the German Tex Jerry Eamon, and they were close friends. So I signed Tex to a long-term contract. But it worked. because we certainly didn't start out very good. That first year, I can tell you, there were more than 365 days in that year. When you only win 12 games, you have 350 goals in your net. It's a big, tall climb up that mountain. But the one thing I knew, and the one thing he showed, it could be done. He wouldn't have come here if he didn't think it couldn't be done. So I'll tell you, he will live on. His imprint, his philosophies, the legacy of Al Arbour lives on. And I miss him.
My longtime colleague at Sports Channel and more recently with the Madison Square Garden networks, the maven Stan Fischler, has sent along. Stan is a visiting family in Israel, and Stan has sent along something that he asked I read. And it starts this way. Having covered all manner of sports since my Brooklyn Dodgers won the World Series in 1955, I've had the pleasure, not to mention mispleasure, of dealing with all manner of managers and coaches. Some, such as the Rangers' Phil Watson, were difficult. Phil thought a has-been should be called a Ben-has. And some, like Chicago's Rudy Pillis, were riotously funny. A few, Tom Rennie in particular, were gentlemen with a special capital G. And then there was John Tortorella, but we'll leave it at that. In my sporting lifetime, longer than most of you, there was one who towered over them all, and it is the man that we honor here today, the truly wonderful Al Arbour. Chico Resch once told me that Al was the greatest coach in hockey history. To that I asked whether it was because Radar won 4 Stanley Cups. No, Chico shot back. It was that, plus the human being that Al was, and the manner with which he treated his players, and well, then a pause. Well, just because he was Al. Yes, because he was Al. There was Al, and then they threw away the mold. Orchestrating the greatest hockey team of all time through 19, count them, 19 consecutive playoff series wins required the insights of an Einstein, the one-liners of a Henny Youngman, and the wizardry of a world chess master. Somehow, Al managed to press all the right buttons with the right players at the right time in the right games. But there was more to Al than that. As we know, he was eternally devoted to his marvelous wife, Claire, and to his children, and to the greater hockey family on Long Island. Radar got angry at the right time, and hilarious when the spirit moved him. For more than a decade, he even tolerated my questions. Why do we feel so good when we think about Al? In my native Brooklyn, we'd sum it up merely by saying that he was a great guy. In Yiddish, the word is mensch, which means a superior gent. If my dad was around, he'd use the term I only heard him mention for one fellow. He was a prince. You get the point. So I'll end it with this little tribute by saying that when it came to hockey and humanity, our Al was the one and only. Radar, thanks for the memories. Before I introduce this next gentleman, I just want to remind the alumni, the guests who are here today, the current players, to please stay for a group photo down front here when we're finished up with the Monsignor. So don't go away. And I think I see a couple of alumni over here as well. Please, anybody who is with the Islanders at any time, come join this group photo. Well, it was 10 years ago that Garth Snow took over as general manager of the New York Islanders. His steady, unwavering rebuild of the franchise is on the cusp of reaping those great rewards that we saw back in the 1980s. Ladies and gentlemen, your general manager, Garth Snow.
Thank you, Jigs. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of our alumni, our distinguished guests who traveled from all around. I'd also like to recognize our fans. We have the best fans in hockey. Thank you. I have the tremendous privilege to be able to formally announce this as the Arbour rink. It'll be on display. That will be on display, a historical memorial, as well as the Arbour 1,500 banner. I had a great opportunity about 8 years ago to spend about 3 days with the coach when he came back to coach that 1,500th game. And for us, we were a team that were in the process of rebuilding our team, but it was a tremendous opportunity for me to be able to spend some quality time with a hero that I grew up admiring. So for us as an organization to see after we came back, and I believe we won 3-2 against the Pittsburgh Penguins, and the picture on the ice, the banner was dropped down, and to see all of Al's former players and everyone gravitating towards Al, Claire and his family, a special moment for me as an Islander. So to Claire and the Arbour family, thank you from the Islanders to our fans for allowing your dad to be such a big part of this community. Thank you.
To you wonderful Islander fans who have come out today to join in this service, to John Ledecky, the new ownership group, to the Islanders, alumni, current players, and especially to the Arbour family, thank you for allowing me to be a part of this. Again, I remind the players, current players, the alumni, and the special guests to join us with the family for a group photo here. I'll turn it over once more to Monsignor Jim Vaughn.
We've heard so much about Al's life. What a treasure that is for all of us to know now that this has been shared with us. The journey home for Al was not easy. Claire spoke of that with me this morning, and I also shared with her that my own mother died in March after a long struggle with dementia and after a long, long goodbye. That long goodbye is not easy, and that long goodbye has a broken heart connected to it in so many ways. A joyous and wonderful life with a very long goodbye. In the year 1200, there was a man who lived named Ignatius. They called him Ignatius of Antioch, Ignatius of Loyola. And he lived on in our faith and in our society to be the founder of the Jesuits, to be the founder of the Jesuit order, and many, many Catholic universities are named in his tradition. But at the end of his life, he too experienced that long goodbye, that dementia. that is so difficult at the end of a loved one's very joyous and prosperous life. And he wrote a little prayer that he offered to God as he was losing his memory, as he was losing his ability to know the people around him. And so I thought it appropriate today, when we were planning this, that we would end with that little prayer and pray it in Al's name today. And then after that prayer, to join together in a song. This song is not a Christian song. It's not a Jewish song or a Muslim song. It's a human song. It's a song that talks about where peace begins. A song that talks about legacy. A song that talks about living as legends. So I'd ask if you could all please stand now. And in your program is this very simple prayer. Let's pray this prayer together for Al. Let's pray for Claire and the family. And let's ask the Lord to be with us as we pray to be the peacemakers in this world. So let us pray. Receive, O Lord, all my liberty. Take my memory, my understanding, and my entire will. Whatsoever I have or possess, thou hast bestowed upon me. I give it all back to thee, and surrender it wholly to be governed by thy will. Give me love for thee alone, along with thy grace, and I am rich enough and ask for nothing more.